welcome to what they really said.
We're launching into a deep dive today, and the sources we're looking at, they offer a truly rare look behind the polished Hollywood exterior of one of the world's biggest stars.
Yeah.
This is less about red carpets and blockbuster meetings, and it's much more about the raw, complex psychology of someone performing at the absolute highest level.
In a world where every move is watched.
Exactly. In a highly, highly visible world.
That's right. Our material is rooted in a recent extensive conversation with Chris Hemsworth. And what emerged is, well, it's a fascinating roadmap. It cuts right past that celebrity persona.
Mm-hmm.
And it guides us into these fundamental, universal human experiences. We're talking about how he manages, debilitating anxiety,
Right.
the intense psychological pressure that comes with global fame, and the profound, deeply personal family challenges he is currently navigating. Specifically, the realities surrounding his father's Alzheimer's diagnosis.
And for you, the learner, our mission today is critical. We're not just summarizing a celebrity interview. We're cutting through all that noise to extract actionable insights on vulnerability.
Okay.
We want to see the patterns in how raw, emotional honesty can actually fuel deeper connection. We're going to explore how we can practically manage overwhelming pressure just by learning to immediately reframe our nervous physical feelings.
That's a huge one.
It is. And perhaps most importantly, we need to understand how those seemingly distant childhood patterns, especially those related to, say, financial insecurity, end up shaping our greatest and often our most irrational lifelong fears.
So before we even get to the immense pressure of global fame and, these high-stakes superhero roles, we have to start at the source.
You have to.
How did that foundational environment prepare him, or maybe failed to prepare him, for the structured, media-saturated world of Hollywood?
This is such a critical point because the foundation is so radically different from his current life. He speaks very, very vividly about his formative years growing up in the Northern Territory of Australia.
In a remote indigenous community.
Specifically within a remote indigenous community.
Yeah. It's a story that feels almost, plucked from a different century. He painted a picture of early life just devoid of all modern clutter.
Totally.
He mentions these stark details, like being the only white kid in the indigenous school.
Right.
Not owning a pair of shoes, not having a television. At one point, his family actually lived in a tent.
It's incredible. And he says the environment was so wild that he remembers Buffalo just casually walking down the main street.
Just a normal Tuesday.
Just a normal Tuesday. And that lack of conventional structure, that total immersion in the elements and in, the traditional way of life, it created this unique psychological space. He recalls that at the time it just felt normal. He used the words as familiar and comfortable and organic as anything I've ever felt.
So his world was entirely present, entirely sensory. There was none of the constant digital noise we all associate with modern life.
Not at all.
I think that's key. That deep, visceral connection with the land and the people. It clearly became a kind of psychological baseline for him. He wasn't reflecting on his life. He was just living it.
In a state of flow.
Right.
Right.
And it was only when they moved back to suburban Melbourne, catching the bus and the train, adapting to a structured, scheduled life, that the shock hit.
That was the moment of adaptation.
That was it. The realization that, my early life was unique.
And he traces his deep sense of gratitude and his ability to maintain perspective, even amid the chaos of fame, directly back to that period. He learned early on what truly mattered. Connection, the land, simplicity.
But here's where it gets interesting. Here is where the psychological link to ambition forms. How did this remote, unstructured foundation feed into the incredible professional drive you need for acting?
What's so fascinating here is how the lack of continuous external stimulation, no phones, no devices, no screens, actually forced his internal world to become extraordinarily complex.
So the mind has to fill the space.
The mind fills the space. Being outdoors and reading epic fantasy novels, specifically Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, he says it truly awoke something in him.
So because the external world was simple, his internal world became boundless. It was filled with dragons and elves and...
Exactly. Fantasy became his primary mental resource. When you remove that continuous structured stimulation, the brain, it just fills that void with imagination. And this internal fantasy became the blueprint for his career.
Right, because his initial ambition, it wasn't to be an actor or a celebrity. It was something far more profound.
Much deeper.
He wanted to be the character, not the person playing the character, but the actual character.
Precisely. He saw acting as the closest physical realization of that fantasy life he had cultivated in the Northern Territory. If he wanted to experience intergalactic travel, or if he wanted to embody the physical prowess of a mythical hero.
The only way to do it was to play the role.
The only pathway was through playing the role. It wasn't about fame, it was a pure sense of transportation.
A form of escapism, but one he clarifies wasn't about escaping a bad life. It was about being transported to a world that just kept him utterly captivated.
Yeah.
That longing for adventure, that Peter Pan quality instilled in him from that early remote age, became the engine for his professional journey.
And that engine, that initial spark of fantasy, it required an incredible level of dedication to turn into a high-functioning career. This sets up the crucial duality we see in him.
Okay.
The absolute necessity of boundless imagination and escapism, mixed with an almost crippling commitment to structure and dedication. He recognized that it took a fair amount of madness and an insane dedication to transform that childhood daydream into a professional reality.
And that duality, the intense dedication juxtaposed with the necessity of surrender, that's precisely what defines his acting process.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about this calculated analytical preparation approach, which has to be immediately followed by a terrifying, complete surrender to the moment.
It really speaks to a universal principle of high performance. True freedom requires immense discipline first. He connected this concept explicitly to the late, great Kobe Bryant. The analogy being that structure and extreme preparation, when you do it correctly, they lead to ultimate spontaneity.
You can't be truly free and spontaneous when the camera's rolling if you're still trying to remember your lines.
Or figure out the character's motivation. You have to have done all that work beforehand.
So the extreme preparation, which can take months of thinking and physical conditioning, that gives you the psychological ability to be completely free, spontaneous, and intuitive when it counts.
It's the structured commitment that builds the runway.
Exactly. Allowing you to demolish all that preparation in the moment of performance, which he calls the greatest adventure.
And that ability to let go, that surrender portion, that's where the risk is highest, but it's also where true, memorable authenticity lies. And the best case study we have for this method was the creation of his character in George Miller's latest film, Furioso.
That sounds like a monumental task.
Mm-hmm.
The character he was tasked with embodying was described as a pretty ugly, villainous individual on paper.
Yep.
So from a human standpoint, how do you, as an empathetic modern actor, convincingly embody something so morally monstrous without instinctively passing judgment on it?
His solution, it really demonstrates the depth of his commitment to empathy. And it's a tool any of us can use when trying to understand a difficult personality in our own lives.
So what did he do?
He started journaling as the character. This wasn't external notes about the villain. He was inhabiting the villain's mind, writing from the first person.
Wow. That is a profound commitment. He had to force himself to find justification for these monstrous acts.
Exactly. He had to believe, absolutely, that from the villain's point of view, he was the hero. He was operating under a personal code, often rooted in the principle of survival of the fittest.
So he had to build a whole new ethical framework.
A temporary one, yeah. But that immersion allowed him to shed his personal judgment and adopt it.
And what was the result on set?
He notes that by the time he got to set, everything he had analytically planned began to just fall away because the character had taken over. That intense preparation became muscle memory, leading to real-time experimentation, improvisation.
A spontaneous, deep dive into the psyche of this individual that went far beyond what was just on the page.
Far beyond the written script. And this leads us to view acting not just as an artistic profession, but as a genuine psychological gift.
Acting as a form of applied therapy.
Or applied empathy. It forces the actor to sit in another's shoes, literally, and look at the world through a different lens.
It sounds incredibly humbling, because whether or not you agree with the character's actions, you are forced to find the logic, the humanity, even the twisted humanity within them for a prolonged period.
It is. He notes that the actor inevitably comes out having gained a new perspective, which is inherently healthy because it teaches you that there are multiple realities operating simultaneously.
And this sense of performing under pressure is something he recognized is not unique to him.
Right. He shared this conversation with his mother, who's a high school teacher, and she helped him contextualize the seemingly unique pressure of Hollywood.
That must have been a great moment of grounding for him. She essentially drew an analogy between her staff room and his set.
Precisely. She compared her experience to his, saying, the principal's the producer, the students are the audience, her colleagues are the cast, and the school inspectors are the critics.
That's brilliant.
Every single day, she has to perform under scrutiny, ensuring a perfect outcome under immense time pressure.
It totally normalizes the pressure. It makes it clear that performance anxiety, the feeling of being judged, the overwhelming need to excel, the fear of failure, it's not unique to an A-list movie set.
Not at all. It is a common human experience that you face in any highly scrutinized environment. Think of a surgeon, a CEO presenting quarterly results.
Or a teacher leading a classroom. The structure of the anxiety is the same.
And that realization, that's really the crucial bridge to our next section. Understanding the difference between the fear response and the excitement response, and learning how to flip the switch.
That universality of pressure immediately transitions into his very personal relationship with anxiety. He describes an obsessive origin to his success, bordering on addiction, once he decided to commit to acting.
He recognizes he needed a certain amount of madness and a deeply profound commitment to excel in such a competitive field.
But that same obsessive drive, which was the engine of his success, immediately triggered overwhelming pressure. Even on his earliest jobs, like the Australian soap opera Home and Away.
And this wasn't just healthy ambition, it was a deeply damaging fear of catastrophic failure.
He admitted that he wasn't just worried about today's scene, he was looking 10 years ahead.
Yeah.
He was creating these entirely fantastical scenarios where screwing up one scene or one audition in Sydney would somehow instantly travel to Hollywood, become this legendary failure, and end his career before it even began.
It sounds exhausting.
The pressure absolutely corrupted his ability to be present.
And he recounts lying in bed, just ruminating about scenes he felt he screwed up days earlier, and waking up with a literal shot of adrenaline, thinking about what he was inevitably going to screw up next.
So the pressure he was putting on the long-term outcome entirely stole the joy of the present process.
Completely.
But here's the massive paradox. We see this often in high performers. The very thing that caused the anxiety, that intense, heightened sense of awareness, that ability to absorb too much information and be acutely attuned to everything happening on set, is also what he calls his secret sauce.
Right. He had to confront this contradiction firsthand. He noticed that when he was genuinely exhausted, or conversely, when he was feeling complacent and didn't care for some reason,
His performance suffered.
his performance was noted by directors as flat or lacking spark. That obsessive, highly stimulated, almost electrified state was required for the energy and spontaneity that made his performances click and feel authentic.
So the anxiety was the engine, but it was an engine that was simultaneously destroying his peace.
Exactly.
The issue then becomes, how do you harness that necessary high energy without letting the accompanying fear just consume you?
And that high energy level is difficult to switch off. He mentioned high intensity roles, specifically the improvisational comedy required for Ragnarok,
Right.
to maintain that ecstatic, electrified, on-the-spot energy. He was drinking Red Bulls and slamming energy drinks on set.
The result was severe jitters and residual energy that wouldn't just dissipate naturally. He needed a trip to the gym, sometimes late at night, just to physically come down from the character's energy.
And from the chemical stimulation, it's a classic feedback loop. The body is trained to associate this high energy state with professional output, which makes it extremely difficult to find stillness or relaxation when the job is done.
But the solution he found was genuinely revolutionary. And he gleaned it from reading performance anxiety literature. This is the critical anxiety interpretation hack that we, you, the listener, can apply immediately. The literature showed him that the physical responses, the elevated heart rate, the tremor in the hands, the nervous energy, the sweaty palms, for fear and for excitement are physiologically identical.
It's the same. We're talking about the sympathetic nervous system kicking in. When you're excited about a roller coaster, your heart races. When you're terrified by a dark alley, your heart races.
The physical body gives the exact same signal.
The exact same signal. The only difference is purely the label our brain applies to that sensation.
That insight fundamentally shifts everything. The problem is not the physical feeling itself. It's the immediate subconscious narrative we attach to that feeling. He realized that when he felt that shot of adrenaline, his brain was automatically labeling it, danger, you're going to fail.
So the hack is learning to interrupt that automatic labeling process. Instead of interpreting that nervous energy as a signal for fear, he learned to actively narrate it differently.
He started telling himself, this is signaling excitement.
This is the enthusiastic shot that means I'm ready.
That sounds simple, but for someone who has spent 2 decades associating that feeling with imminent catastrophe, it must take incredible mental discipline.
It's an active act of psychological self-deception in the best possible way.
It is, but it's a strategy of making friends with anxiety. By owning the jitters and deliberately welcoming them, he says, bring it on. He shifts the dynamic.
So anxiety stops being something that sneaks up on him from the back door.
And it begins to feel like a consciously deployed tool. It transforms the physical reaction from a threat into a gift. It becomes his spidey senses coming alive.
Allowing him to think quicker, improvise faster, and react more spontaneously, which is exactly what high-level performance demands.
And crucially, he notes that he now deliberately puts himself into that ecstatic, heightened state before the performance, but on his own terms.
He has taken control of the accelerator. It's no longer anxiety controlling him. He's controlling the fuel source. That transformation of fear into purpose and fuel is, I think, the ultimate lesson from his performance psychology deep dive.
Moving away from the performance stage now, we see how these patterns of high pressure and obsession were deeply rooted in a childhood experience that is often forgotten when looking at someone so successful.
And that is financial insecurity.
Exactly. The source material meticulously details the early financial strain. He grew up with no money, his parents borrowing from grandparents just before payday.
And a constant awareness of household bills and economic tightness. This environment instilled a deep, almost primal need in him to succeed, partly driven by a desire to remove that pressure for his parents.
And this need to protect his family and ensure stability created a deep, lifelong fear that he himself recognizes as entirely illogical.
Yeah, he notes that even though his family is now financially secure and taken care of, they have generational wealth, that irrational fear lingers.
The thought that the wealth of success is going to run out or be taken away.
Right. It drives him to be constantly obsessed with securing even more. He describes this as an obsession with safety, even when all logical metrics suggest he is completely safe.
It's a classic case of past trauma dictating present behavior. The wealth solves the practical problem, but it doesn't solve the ingrained emotional anxiety.
Correct. And this is where the deeper analysis is so crucial. Wealth certainly solves logistical and material problems, but Hemsworth realized it doesn't buy the core emotional need for safety. That money obsession, that relentless striving for more security, it becomes detrimental because you never actually enjoy the stability you've already achieved. You're always running toward a finish line that perpetually moves further away.
So he had to ask himself, where did true safety come from when he was a child? If it wasn't money, what was it?
His profound realization was that despite the very real financial struggles as a child, he felt utterly secure and safe.
He did.
And he traced that feeling not to the bank account, but to the love, the presence, and the connection in his household. He felt appreciated, connected, and truly part of this household.
The safety was an emotional construct built by his parents' unwavering presence, not a financial one bit by a bank balance. That is a massive lesson, especially for those of us raising children. He expressed concern for his own kids, worrying that growing up in extreme privilege, they might lack the appreciation and the essential lessons that he learned growing up without money.
Will they take things for granted? It's a common fear.
A very common fear.
And this is where his mother provided timeless wisdom, drawing on her experience seeing countless families from various socioeconomic backgrounds.
What did she say?
She told him that if you compare households with extreme wealth and those with very little, you find roughly the same amount of successful versus unsuccessful stories, the same amount of well-adjusted versus struggling stories.
So the environment, in terms of material abundance, is almost secondary.
Absolutely. The core component is always the same. Love, connection, security, and whether the child feels safe to explore who they are as an individual. His mother's point was that success isn't purchased by wealth, it's nurtured by stability and love.
That must have given him great comfort.
It did. It helped him decouple that financial anxiety from emotional safety.
We transition now to what is arguably the most profoundly moving and vulnerable part of the sources, confronting the reality of mortality and his family's staggering genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease.
And this experience began entirely unexpectedly during the filming of the Limitless documentary. The director and production team, focused on longevity, ran extensive genetic tests.
And it was Peter Attia, his physician, who took him aside off camera with some really serious news.
The genetic discovery was massive. He found out he carries 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene. For our listeners who don't follow genetic risk factors closely, this is a significant high-risk indicator for Alzheimer's disease.
So to put this into perspective, what does that actually mean?
Well, only about 1 to 2% of the general population carries 2 copies of this gene. Most people have ApoE3. Having even 1 copy of ApoE4 increases risk, but having 2 copies, which he inherited, one from each parent, puts him in the highest statistical risk category for developing the disease.
It's an incredibly rare genetic throw of the dice.
It's like being dealt 2 highly improbable hands in poker simultaneously. It's not a guarantee, of course, but the probability has been multiplied exponentially.
And initially, his reaction was to just dismiss it.
Yeah, it felt abstract. It's something old people get, he thought. A problem decades down the track.
But the situation hit with shocking, immediate reality 2 or 3 years later.
When his father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
And the family anomaly is staggering. He discovered that both his mother and his father carried 2 copies of ApoE4.
Which means that he and his 2 brothers, Luke and Liam, all inherited the maximum high-risk ApoE4 configuration. The odds of both parents having this configuration and all 3 children inheriting both copies are just statistically phenomenal.
Facing the diagnosis in front of them made the abstract genetic risk terrifyingly concrete. And the most confronting part was observing his father's immediate, profound fear.
And his father's biggest concern wasn't his own cognitive decline.
Oh.
It was the fear of being a burden to his family.
That is such a heartbreakingly common fear among patients facing degenerative disease, the loss of agency and the feeling of becoming a weight on their loved ones.
And here we find a moment of profound personal reflection and guilt for Hemsworth, but also an unexpected gift.
He felt immense guilt for having avoided the topic.
Immense. He hadn't asked his father about these deep fears sooner, avoiding the discomfort. He was only forced to have that raw, vulnerable conversation during the filming of the documentary, on camera.
So the documentary, which was intended to explore the limits of human potential, unexpectedly became a catalyst for this intimate family reckoning.
That unintentional consequence led to what he called a beautiful discussion that he acknowledges they likely never would have initiated otherwise.
And the impact of their vulnerability, it extended far beyond their own family unit.
Yeah, he shared a story of a fellow Alzheimer's patient who reached out, saying that hearing Hemsworth's dad speak so honestly in the documentary gave him the resolve to speak up himself.
Because his own children were avoiding the topic.
They were avoiding it due to the stigma and the sheer awkwardness of confronting the decline.
That is the power of shared struggle. The key lesson for his family was that the diagnosis motivated them to be more proactive and present, and to aggressively remove the awkwardness around uncomfortable conversations.
The only way to navigate such a difficult looming journey is together, through radical vulnerability.
And a powerful example of their proactive approach was this supercharged version of reminiscence therapy they utilized during the documentary process.
And they went to extreme lengths, which again speaks to their dedication to the process. They stripped the furniture from their childhood house.
And sourced specific items, the exact posters, the old DVD players, to perfectly recreate the house exactly as it was when the family lived there years ago.
This is based on the principle that the intense emotional memories, the ones stored with great effect, often remain accessible even as short-term memory fades.
So the recreation was designed to stimulate the hippocampus, the brain's center for memory and emotion, by creating an environment just rich with potent triggers.
And the effect was visceral. Hemsworth, as an adult, struggled to articulate the overwhelming emotional feeling of walking into that recreated past. But his dad, in moments,
He came to life.
Intense, visceral memories were triggered, creating these powerful pockets of recognition and clarity.
And this experience solidified for them the importance of continuing to give his father agency and authority over his own life, even amidst the cognitive decline.
Which means actively engaging him by asking him questions that they know he knows the answer to, reinforcing his competence.
And most impressively, watching him continue to ride his motorbike.
He still races historically, which is fantastic. Hemsworth notes that his father still blitzes the pack in these historic races.
Wow.
Losing the ability to ride would be the most obvious, devastating representation of the loss of agency, which is a major concern. The family is determined to protect that sense of self and authority as long as possible.
And we have to, as the sources did, acknowledge the high risk and pressure this places on his mother.
Yes. She also carries 2 ApoE4 copies, and Peter Adio was actually more concerned about her health trajectory.
And why is that?
The concern is rooted in physiology. The stress, the sleepless nights, and the increased cortisol, the stress hormone, from constant caregiving are incredibly detrimental. Chronic high cortisol levels are known to be damaging to cognitive health and overall well-being.
So she's an extremely high-risk individual who is also under maximum duress.
The highest stress. And it's the tragedy of the relationship shift. Their loving romantic partnership transforms, almost inevitably, into one of patient and carer.
And he says the depth of their conversations and interactions has diminished.
Largely due to the rapid decline in his father's short-term memory capacity. The person you shared your life with is slowly becoming unreachable in certain ways.
This immense reality check has fundamentally informed his professional decisions. He noted he is now actively turning down films to spend more time with his parents.
And his reasoning is simple, powerful, and universally applicable.
He says 10 years down the track, he won't regret not doing the films.
But he will absolutely regret not spending this precious time with them now, while they are still present.
If we connect all these profound personal stories, the anxiety hack, the financial fear, the confrontation with mortality, what universal wisdom has been gained, the sources clearly point toward a path of philosophical simplicity, even as life itself becomes more complex.
That's right. The core concept he articulated is that complexity is simplicity.
Which sounds like a contradiction.
It does, but it means accepting that everything in life is gray or binary. A gift and a curse, a polarity. When you accept this fundamental nature of existence, you stop searching for definitive black and white answers or trying to find the single right way to do things.
I think that approach cuts through so much modern confusion.
Yeah.
We are constantly seeking optimized, singular solutions, but he illustrated this acceptance of duality perfectly with the passing of a close friend.
Yes. He noted that the initial grief and anguish were overwhelming, but through that intense pain came a sudden, unexpected lightness and stillness.
All the trivial day-to-day ruminations, the small anxieties, the minor slights, they just dissipated entirely.
He realized that you only know love because you know grief.
The emotional polarity is accepted as one complete experience. The anguish is intrinsically linked to the blessing of having loved that person.
There are interdependent experiences. This realization helps him navigate complicated spaces and moments of adversity because he knows that joy and suffering, success and failure are two sides of the same coin.
And that grounding philosophy is profoundly reflected in the way he chooses his inner circle. He expressed immense gratitude for his core team, his assistant, trainer, costume guy, and best mates.
People he's known for 14 to 35 years, dating back to his earliest days.
He spoke about the tragedy of isolation he observed in high-level people, meeting CEOs and other celebrities who live these isolated, lonely existences without true grounding friendships.
Their successes inadvertently walled them off.
His core team provides the necessary humility and grounding quality that fame often strips away. He defines a real friend clearly. Someone you can laugh with, someone who keeps you humble.
Someone you can roast and banter with, demonstrating a good self-deprecating quality.
And the litmus test. A real friend is someone who would still be there, absolutely unchanged.
If it all got taken away, that's the real definition of emotional security.
Finally, his wisdom centers on the importance of slowing down and simplicity, a lesson he learned from his children. He confesses he is still working on patience.
Oh, yes.
But the greater lesson was the importance of presence and time over extravagance.
He realized he was overcomplicating things by trying to engineer these elaborate, extravagant experiences for his kids. Big trips, expensive gifts.
When in reality, all they truly wanted was his presence.
His focused attention and his time.
So his goal now, as a man, is to slow down, reset, and recharge. He wants to be less outcome-focused, less obsessed with the next successful movie or the next big financial goal, and more present for the simple joy and thrill of the experience itself.
The pursuit of the thing must be as enjoyable as achieving the thing.
And this leads directly into his provocative final law, advocating for a global 3-day or 4-day work week.
This is where he ties his personal realization about the value of time directly into a global policy proposal. He argues that this isn't about laziness, but about efficiency and quality of life.
His core argument is that people would work harder and more efficiently during those 3 or 4 focused days because they have something profound and restorative to look forward to.
The reduction of hours, he believes, would increase mental clarity and focus.
It's interesting how this connects back to his childhood. That remote, unstructured environment gave him boundless internal capacity because he wasn't constantly draining his energy on structured tasks.
He's arguing for a systemic way to reintroduce that necessary downtime into adult life. He fundamentally believes that life shouldn't revolve entirely around productivity.
By granting that extra day off, you prioritize family, personal health, exploration, and presence.
Which in turn feeds the soul and prevents the kind of burnout that leads to flat performance, both professionally and personally.